And in Mark chapter 8, verse 14 to 21, it says, the disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf they had with them on the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. And they discussed this with one another and said, is it because we have no bread? Have you ever had a conversation with somebody and you thought that that person was talking to you and giving you a sarcastic remark, trying to elbow you to give you a point? Well, that's exactly what the disciples thought Jesus was doing when he said, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. They thought Jesus was having a go at them. But we all know that Jesus wasn't. And he was actually speaking of something natural to illustrate a spiritual point, but they were completely off track. They weren't on the page with Jesus, and so they didn't actually get the point. And I want to ask you the question, first of all, how many times do we misread people? How many times have we had conversations with people where we thought, oh, they've been a bit rude, or they've been this or that or the other, or they're having a go at me, or, you know, and we've come away with an impression that's not good. Well, that's what's happening here with the disciples. How many times have we read the Bible and misread it and got something that it's not actually saying? And how many times have we listened to the words of Jesus and misunderstood Jesus and thought he was saying one thing when he's been saying another? And how many times have we misunderstood life, misread the situation, misread what's going on in our world or in our circumstances, and thought, oh, things aren't going well, God must be punishing me, or you know, this, that, or the other, and we just get the wrong impression. And that's exactly what's happening in this story, is that the disciples are getting the wrong impression. I remember meeting a lady who was about 40 years of age, and she had been to a counselor, and that counselor had helped her with a problem that she'd had since she was about 3 or 4 years of age. And she came running into the room, and her mother was in a particularly stressed state, and her mother made a negative comment that was quite derogatory about her, and she received that into her spirit. And that comment actually made her have an attitude towards her mother and feel rejected by her mother. And she carried that attitude of rejection from that age of about 3 or 4 years of age right through to her adulthood till she was 40. And she finally came to deal with it. And in that time, right through her growing up years as a child, she struggled to get on with her mother. And it was a difficult relationship. And it didn't matter what Mum did, she would misunderstand it, misrepresent it, look at it in a negative light. And then this day she got to the counsellor, and the counsellor unwrapped that and helped her to reframe that memory of that conversation and the words that were spoken, and to see that conversation from her mother's point of view, from an adult point of view, not from a child's point of view. And as she saw it from the adult perspective, she began to realize the stress and what her mother was going through, and how overwhelmed she felt at that time, and how that she had run into that room at just the wrong moment where Mum was just so overwhelmed that she just couldn't help herself but to let out a negative comment. And she had carried that all that time. And so as this counsellor reframed it and gave her a new perspective on it, she was able to forgive her mother. And she said the interesting thing was that as soon as I reframed that memory and saw it from an adult perspective, all these memories of the good things my mum had done for me came flooding back in. All the time she'd spent with me, all the things she'd done for me that were good. It was like that one negative comment, that one negative experience had blocked out and overridden everything that was positive and good and loving that her mother had done for her. And so it's really important that when we're listening in a conversation, when we're engaging with people, that we listen to what they're really saying and work at making sure that we're understanding things correctly. So here in our Bible text this morning, Jesus has to change the disciples' misreading of his words. And he's trying to teach them his spiritual truth. And he's not telling them off at all. He's not the least concerned about bread. And as we go back into the text, we see it goes on. It says, aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, what are you talking about having no bread? Don't you see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do your eyes but fail to see, and ears and have ears but fail to hear? Do you remember when I broke bread, the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many basketfuls or pieces did we pick up? 12, they said. And then I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000. How many basketfuls or pieces did we pick up? They answered 7. He said to them, do you still not understand? What was Jesus saying to the disciples at this point? He was saying, come on guys, you're in a boat with me. There's only 12 of us. We've got 1 loaf of bread between us for 12 people. Don't you remember the miracle? We fed 5,000 with 2 loaves. We fed 4,000 with 7 loaves. What are you worried about 1 loaf of bread for? Why are you thinking that I am chastising you over that 1 loaf? Don't you understand that you're in a boat with a miracle worker? You're in a boat with the Son of God. You're in a boat with Jesus. And sometimes in our lives, we forget who's in our boat. Sometimes we forget that the miracle worker is our best friend. Sometimes we forget the miracles that God has already done in our lives. And so Jesus says, remember the miracles. And then Jesus goes on to say, be careful of the yeast. What's the yeast? Let's try and understand what Jesus is saying here. What is the yeast? Well, yeast is a fungus. And if you put enough, just a little bit of yeast in dough, the whole thing blows up like a balloon. Have you ever said a wrong word? Just a little word, and it's blown up in your face, caused a row or an upset? That's yeast right there. Yeast is like a tiny little virus that's hard to see but can infect a whole world and shut down people's lives and countries and economies. Let loose, it can destroy and disrupt everything that we know. It can blow up in our faces, and that's what we're dealing with right now, isn't it? Yeast. Yeast is that thing that you don't want to have in your life. The yeast in Jesus' statement is a metaphor for unbelief. for pride, for sin. He said just a little bit of that can contaminate your whole life, can blow up in your face. How easy is it sometimes where we like to dabble in a few little things that we like, and we think we're safe and we think we're fine and we have things under control, but then all of a sudden it blows up in our face and gets bigger than we expected. And things happen that we didn't plan for. This is yeast. He says, be careful of the yeast of the Pharisees. What's the yeast of the Pharisees? It was their religion and the control and everything that went with that, and the rules and the regulations. And he goes on, the yeast of Herod. What's that? Politics. Man, the election coming out. Don't you hate politics? So many decisions. Watch out for the yeast of politics. See, remember last week we spoke about how the cross of Jesus forced the world to see how corrupt the ruling powers of politics and religion had become in his day and in his generation, and how they were destroying the world, and how Jesus was showing the world a better way of living. He's saying, don't live the way that they are. Don't live under that system, but live this way and your life will be in a better space. And the disciples are still stuck on bread. And so Jesus talks to them about the bread, and that's what's going on here. You know, the disciples had completely forgotten the miracles. The miracles had happened. The miracle of feeding of the multiplication of bread happened twice. He fed the 5,000, and a few months later, he feeds 4,000. And why is that so important? It's important because of all the miracles recorded in the Gospels, this is the only one that is recorded in all four Gospels, and it's the only one that we see Jesus repeating twice, apart from resurrection. And some of us, we need to rehearse the history that we have with God. Because you and I, we have known God for a little while. And you can't know God for too long before you come to a crisis in your life and you need a miracle, or you need something to happen in your life that moves you forward or breaks through or does something. Sometimes the miracle is just keeping your sanity. Sometimes the miracle is just keeping your life together. Sometimes it's just staying on track and not losing the plots. But miracles happen in our lives. Sometimes it's a healing, and there are people sitting in this room right now who have had miracles of healing in their life. See, God still does miracles today. And yes, we want to see more of those miracles. We're praying and believing and expecting God to do more because he's in our boat. And we want to break through in those areas. But we have to remember the miracles that we've already gained, the places that we've already got to. You know, what I've discovered over the years is that a miracle lasts for about 3 weeks. You get a miracle and it's great. You think, wow, this is great. And the next week, oh yes, I'm testifying about that. And a week later, you're still rejoicing about it. And by the third week, you think, well, life's getting back to normal now. I need another miracle. Life's starting to get boring again. You know, let's get exciting lives. Let's push through for some of these miracles that God has for our lives. The other thing that we see in this story is that the history that we have with God gives us the strength and the faith to stand up with strength in our heart and faith in our heart for whatever we're going through right now. It's okay, we're going through level 2 again. We're facing that ugly pandemic reaching our country again. But because we know our God, because we know what he's done in our lives, if we remind ourselves of that, we have the courage to say, my God will see me through, right? We are not afraid. We do not have to be afraid. We do not have to worry because God is with us. The other thing we see in this story is that God cares for our physical needs as well as our spiritual needs. He fed people. He had fed them spiritual food with his preaching, but now he turns around and he feeds their physical needs with the bread. And it's nice to know that God cares not just for your spirit, but for your physical needs as well. God's concerned about your circumstances. And God is interested in meeting some of those needs as well. It's nice to know that not only God cares, but as you saw from Mark sharing this morning about what's happening with the Community Focus Trust, that there are churches like ours around the world and in our country who seek not only to preach the gospel, but to make the circumstances of people's physical needs better off. There was a theologian by the name of Howard Thurman who says, the power of prayer is directly connected to your willingness to be part of the answer. That's what we're doing with the Focus Trust. That's what we are encouraging ourselves in doing, that we will be part of the answer. We'll not only just pray for people, but we'll be part of the answer in this world. The Apostle James says it this way, that if you see a need and you can meet it and you turn away, then that's not righteousness. That's not good. If you see a need and you have the power to meet it, then reach out and meet that need. And so if we want to frame this in other words, God is looking for somebody to partner with him. And he's here today looking at you and me to partner with him, to care about the condition of the souls and also the physical needs of people's circumstances. And as we look at these two miracles of the feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000, we understand what it is that we need to remember. The first thing that we need to remember is that in both miracles, there are a lot of people. 5,000 men, that's counting. So if you add the women and children, probably about 15,000. And then the 4,000 again, add the women and children. There's a lot of people, a lot of mouths to feed. It's a big problem. And wherever you find people, there's going to be problems. You know, if you're looking for a church with no problems, then you won't find a church that suits you, because every church has people in it. And guess what? You and me, we're people. As long as we have people, we have problems. As long as you're here, we have problems. As long as I'm here, we have problems. As long as everybody else is here, we've got problems. When other people join, we'll have problems again. You can't escape problems. The gospel of Jesus Christ is about people. And so if we're going to preach the gospel, we're going to have problems, right? That's why we need Jesus in our lives. That's why we have the miracle worker in our boat. The second thing that we see in both of these miracles is that compassion was the catalyst for the miracle. In both times, Jesus is moved with compassion, and on one occasion, he actually says that he's got compassion for these people. He verbalizes it. And if we have compassion, we've got to take action, don't we? And God is calling you and me to do something for those around about us. And the exciting thing is that in times like this, when everybody feels like they're in crisis, there's more opportunities than ever. People are more open to talk, or people are more willing to talk about their lives. Remember when we went back to the earthquakes and you went down the street, complete strangers would talk to you and tell you their experience of the earthquake. And a conversation would ensue, and you empathized and you shared your stories, and you found new friends, and you found that everybody was human. And it's the same when we come to the gospel of Jesus Christ, that when we see people, we must have compassion for them, whether they're our type of people or not. Let's have compassion. Let's be moved to take some action. God is calling us to do something in these days. Perhaps that compassion is the key to your next miracle. Perhaps God is wanting to release a miracle into your life, but he's just waiting for you to move in compassion towards somebody else before that miracle will flow, before that will happen. The third thing and the final thing that I want to share with you from the story today is that in both miracles, the disciples were asking the wrong question. And did you know that worry is the byproduct of asking the wrong questions? The more you ask the wrong questions, the more you start to worry. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with the question. It's just that it's not the question that's going to get the answer that you need. When somebody spills milk and there's an accident, there's a number of questions you can ask. Well, who did that? Who's responsible for this? Or you can ask another question. Who's going to clean up the mess? Now, two different questions, but the blame question doesn't get the job done, does it? Doesn't achieve anything. It shouldn't be the first question. The first question should be, how do we clean up the mess? Let's join in together. Let's get this thing done. And so both questions are good questions, but one is the right question, gets a result. One is the wrong question because it doesn't get any result. And in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says, so don't worry saying, now what is he going to say? Because here come the questions, the worry questions. So don't worry saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? Are you glad the Lord put that in there, ladies? God's concerned about your wardrobe. He said, for the pagans run after these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first the kingdom and his righteousness. Then all these things will be added to you. I wonder if the reason you're worried is because you are asking the wrong questions. What if there's another lockdown? Good question, but is it the right question? What if the kids can't get back to school and I've got to be the homeschool teacher? Good question, but is it the right question? Does it get a result? Oh, somebody just sneezed. What if I have it? Oh, what am I going to do about the bills? What if I can't get the groceries? What if I lose my jobs? What if I run out of toilet paper? Are these really the right questions? There's nothing wrong with the questions per se, because we need to have a strategy on how to handle our lives and how to do our everyday things. But what makes them wrong is if you get stuck on the question and obsessed with it, and it then pushes you out of faith and into worry. And that's when the question becomes wrong, because when you're in worry, You can't receive a miracle. You're not positioned to receive a miracle. But when you're in faith, you're positioned to receive a miracle. And we need to be always repositioning ourselves. It's not wrong to have these other questions in our lives, but it's wrong to get stuck on them because they paralyze us and they weaken our faith and they stop us from seeing Jesus and his provision and what he can do in our lives. And we want to be people who rise up and are strong enough to believe God to come through in every situation that we have and that we face in our life. We need to believe that Jesus is the one who is alongside us to comfort us and to lead us and to guide us and to cause our lives to be different from those around about us. That we're not going to be like those who do not have faith and are running around worrying over these things. That we're going to be people who stand up and have a different attitude about us and a different confidence in our lives because we are miracle believers. We are people who believe in a miracle working God. That's who is in my boat. Who is in your boat today? Now, if you're asking all these natural questions and worrying about them, Jesus has a better question. And I want you to think about this question. Jesus turns to his disciples and he gives them a better question. And what is that better question? You're going to have to come back next week for next week's sermon. Why don't we just get ready to pray right now, and the musicians, if you would come. And if you are here today and you haven't asked Jesus to come into your life, or you're watching online and you're feeling overwhelmed with life's challenges, then you need Jesus in your boat. Wherever you're going in life, Jesus wants to be there with you. And we include Jesus in our lives by simply inviting him into our lives.